This is the Listening Tube.
Hello, thank you for putting your ear to the Listening Tube. I'm your host, Bob Whitley. On this episode, we'll hear about Typhoid Mary, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, and I'll chat with the founder of a political party that you might find meets your political desires. But first,
Not the headlines.
when it comes to crime, the Republic of California has found itself in quite a pickle. Specifically, retail theft. It all began way back in 2011, when the California Supreme Court ruled that California's prisons were overpopulated and therefore a violation of the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution because it could be considered cruel and unusual punishment. As a result, 3 years later, California voters approved Proposition 47. Funny thing about California, if you can get enough signatures, you can get a proposition on the ballot. Sure, democracy is a good thing, but the ability to put something on the ballot sometimes encourages mob mentality. Or perhaps the side with the largest advertising budget wins, regardless of the side effects. Part of Proposition 47 modified the sentencing guidelines for thefts of retail merchandise up to $950 in value. To an average person, that's a lot of value. Gone were the days when stealing a pack of gum would get you into trouble. Even more, you can now shoplift a new towel set or queen-size sheets or an air conditioner. So because California's prisons were overcrowded, they found ways to decriminalize certain offenses, including drug crimes. I have nothing against a guy who wants to smoke weed, but there are a lot of drugs out there that ruin lives. Removing the disincentives of being punished by the law can only lead to more drug use. An AP story by Tran Nguyen says California will save $113 million this year, and the money will be given to local programs to fight recidivism, simply by reducing the prison population. That's right, $113 million to keep people from going back to jail. I guess jail itself isn't enough of a deterrent. Maybe that's because the state is doing everything it can to make the stay as pleasant as possible. At least for those who commit a crime horrendous enough to get put in jail to begin with, which seems difficult to do right now, all because a court said the jails were overcrowded. Were California prisons overcrowded? Well, I can tell you that around 1991, the Ventura County prison was overcrowded. You actually had to have seniority to get what little privacy a cell would provide. Us newbies had to sleep on bunk beds in the day room/dining area. There weren't even enough places for everyone to dine. I had to eat at my bunk. So yes, it was overcrowded. I was only in for 48 hours as the result of a DUI. I surrendered late on a Friday afternoon, and it took 13 hours just to get from the front door to where I would sleep. So I only slept in jail for one Saturday night. 2, if you count the night I got arrested. Getting arrested and put in jail is bad enough, but waking up in jail is the worst. I open my eyes, and I'm in a cell with 2 other guys. I was really thirsty, and the water fountain in the cell barely had any pressure. You couldn't drink out of it without licking it as the water dribbled down the side of the part where the water comes out. I asked the guard for a drink of water. He told me to drink from the fountain. When I explained that the water fountain was in disrepair, he seemed less than sympathetic. I realized that reasonably explaining my plight wasn't going to work. So I went in the other direction and demanded a drink of water. Not just that, but I wanted it in a tin cup that I could then use to bang on the bars of the cell after I drank the water. I don't remember the details about what was said next, but at one point the guard said, "If you keep it up, you're going in the rubber room." Well, I was still without a drink, so I was still ornery. The next thing you know, the guard comes to the cell door, opens it, and tells me to step out. I step out. He points and says, "Step over." I step over. He opens another door and says, "Step in." I step in. As it turns out, the Port Hueneme City Police Station did have a rubber room, and I was alone in it. Suddenly, for me, California jails were not overcrowded at all. I had the whole room to myself. In disbelief, I went, I immediately realized the room had wonderful sound qualities. I began to sing, "Figaro, Figaro, 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 Roxanne, you don't have to put on a red light." I sang until the door opened again, thirsty as I was. It was time to let me out. The cop says, "So you think you're Eddie Murphy?" And I said, "So you think you're Eric Estrada?" After an argument over the color of my car, they had gray on the police report, and I insisted my car was in fact silver. They refused to change it, eventually returning my shoelaces and setting me free. I had to walk about a half mile back to where my car was parked from the night before, then drive home, where I finally got that drink of water. Enough about me. The point is, California has been reaping what was sown. In an attempt to reduce criminality and prison population, more crime was created. We just didn't call them crimes anymore. To top it all off, liberal district attorneys turned a blind eye to all kinds of crime, allowing crime to flourish even more. They had different reasons for doing so other than prison overcrowding, but the result was the same. People getting away with committing petty crimes at first, then even more serious crimes become petty crimes. And pretty soon, you can be arrested for murder and be out on the street the next day. It depends on what the DA had for breakfast, I guess. California's governor wants to keep Prop 47 in place. He wants to focus on car thieves and the people who resell the stolen merchandise, not the people stealing the merchandise. Being able to fence stolen goods is always an incentive, so taking out that avenue is a good idea. But if you're still able to steal up to $950 worth of stuff, you'll find a way to turn it into cash or something else you want. If the thefts become widespread enough, maybe an intrastate bartering system will develop. "Hey, I'll trade you some of my poise pads for a bottle of that mango cherry nail polish." But not to deter the theft in the first place won't help, and Prop 47 doesn't deter the ground-level theft. That's led to organized theft. Large groups of people storming a business all at once like a swarm of locusts, gobbling up everything in their path, only to move on when the pickings become too thin. Helpless employees can only stand and watch. Any who try to intervene will be fired for violating company policy. Stores have been locking up displayed products, requiring assistants to shop for personal items like deodorant and razors and over-the-counter drugs. Some stores have simply closed, moved out, abandoned the building, leaving once thriving shopping centers boarded up like ghost towns, ruining neighborhoods, all in an effort to lower the prison population. There are some who want to take another look at Prop 47 and see if it can be tweaked to stop the widespread shoplifting. Targeting repeat offenders by stacking the value of their individual crimes is one idea. Making online resellers verify their merchandise isn't stolen is another. In any case, the issue will probably end up at the ballot box again. There's a group working on a ballot initiative to address some of the issues, and if they get enough signatures by the April deadline, the mob will rule once again. Money does make a difference, though. California voters recently approved a measure that changes the way money allocated for mental health services will be spent. The money itself comes from a tax levied on millionaires in 2004, according to an Associated Press story. Individual counties were given the authority on how to best put the money to work. But now, Proposition 1 includes mandatory guidelines for spending the money. Now, 2/3 of that tax money has to be spent on housing the mentally ill. Now, when your mental health counselor asks, "How you doing?" they can also ask, "Do you have a place to live?" No? Well, you came to the right place. We're now required to spend a certain amount of money on housing, whether we need it or not. If you're a brain-dead meth addict in Bakersfield, you just might get a new house out of it. As for the more densely populated areas of the state, homelessness is a huge problem. That's what this measure is meant to address. So many parts of California's metropolitan areas have become inundated with tent cities popping up in various locations. Along the beaches of Los Angeles, wherever you can find a level spot in San Francisco. I once lived in the streets of LA, but none of us had the gall to pitch a tent on the sidewalk. I don't care if you were homeless in Century City or the Valley or the hills, you couldn't get away with that until you were out in the desert a bit. But now, California is in a homeless crisis. According to the story, since the current governor took over, $27.5 billion have already been committed to the homeless problem. But the problem isn't going away. So the logical response is to throw more money at the problem. Proposition 1 does just that. And it was money that got it over the hump. Proponents of the measure raised millions of dollars to launch an advertising campaign to encourage people to vote in favor. Opponents of the measure raised about $1,000. Passed by 50.2% of the voters, it would be called bipartisan at the federal level. Prop 1 demonstrates how divided the homeless problem in California really is to those who are paying attention. People had different reasons for voting for or against it, but the reality is that just 0.2% in favor will now require counties to spend a majority of the tax money raised from millionaires to rent existing spaces or erect new ones for those who suffer from mental illness. Somehow, since the governor couldn't get more money to throw at the problem, they found a way to redirect money that was already being collected, in the hope that it would take a bite out of the homeless population. In a normal economy, building more houses would bring down the cost of a house. But in California, building more houses will attract more people, causing a need for even more housing that the state will have to build in order to fix the homeless problem. It's a never-ending cycle that can only be stopped by disincentivizing a reliance on the government as provided through the taxpayers. There just might come a time when the beautiful weather and scantily clad hard bodies aren't enough to keep taxpayers in California. It seems like the current governor is doing everything he can to hasten that time limit.
Let's go back through the listening tube for This Week in History.
This week in 1910, the U.S. Congress passes an amendment to the 1907 Immigration Act, barring criminals, paupers, anarchists, and carriers of disease from settling in the U.S. 111 years later, during the height of a global pandemic, while people were told to wear masks and keep 6 feet away from each other, thousands of people each week were spilling across the southern border of the United States without so much as a temperature check. As for criminals, paupers, and anarchists, well, we'll just have to hope we got lucky enough that they didn't want to come here anyway. After all, we are a capitalist society and a nation of laws, right? This week in 1915, Typhoid Mary, whose actual name is Mary Mallon, becomes the first healthy carrier of the disease ever identified in the United States. She is put in quarantine, where she would remain for the rest of her life. 100 years later, in 2015, 12.5 million cases were reported worldwide, according to Wikipedia. About 400 cases are reported each year in the United States. Today, Typhoid Mary would be told to wash her hands more often and be given a vaccine. This week in 1975, construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System begins. According to Wikipedia, the two worst spills in its history were both caused by people shooting holes in it. It's withstood earthquakes and other natural phenomena with very few leaks and no real catastrophes. Still, President Biden stopped construction of the Keystone Pipeline within his first few breaths as president due to environmental activism.
The listening tube will return at the speed of sound. Contact the listening tube by calling 570-601-1101 or email thelisteningtube@outlook.com.
My guest on this episode of The Listening Tube is a man who created a new political party with the hope that it may someday put an end to political parties as we know them. Joining us from his home in the Pacific Northwest is founder of the Solutions Party, Evan Jacqua.
You're exactly right. And also, I think it's really important to remember what George Washington said about political parties. He was very much against them because they tend to become corrupted, they tend to become institutionalized, and they tend to place their own priorities ahead of the priorities of the country. And I think we're seeing that now. And I think one of the things that I would like to see is where we actually sunset political parties after a certain number of election cycles and require that any government recognized political party would have to have new leadership. You could, as the leaders of the previous parties could not just basically make a refried version of the old one. And that way we try to keep trying to minimize the tribalism that we're seeing now that is so destructive to our country.
It is worth noting that neither of our first two presidents belonged to a political party. So what was the inspiration for the Solutions Party?
Well, it comes down to very basically this. Ronald Reagan said that government is not the solution, government is the problem. And I think that was partially right, but I think that it's more fundamental. I think our problem are our politicians. And when you think of politicians, not only here, but worldwide, one of the things that is really evident, and one of the things that I think has been scientifically proven, is that power is probably the most addictive thing that there is. And our politicians get addicted to power, just as John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, said. People get a little bit of power and they completely change, just like somebody who gets dependency on alcohol can completely change, or dependency on drugs, or a gambling addiction. And so people get power and they don't want to give it up. And that becomes the priority, staying in power. One congressman said that all of our budgets are basically, that they do in Washington, are basically with the idea of keeping the powerful in power. And so what happens is that what becomes the priority are their partisan interests in keeping control of the House, or keeping control of the Senate, or winning the White House. Now, I personally don't think that we should have elected officials whose first priority is staying in office. And I think the only way to deal with that is the way you would deal with any addictive substance. If a doctor has to give you a prescription for a highly addictive medication, the way to minimize the possibility you're going to get addicted is to give it in very limited portions spread out. So I think that we should just have our politicians limited to one term, And you cannot run for another office immediately after the ending of your term in office, because what will happen is they'll use that time to basically prepare for their next campaign. So we don't want them in campaign mode. So you get one chance to make a difference, one opportunity to go in and make your mark on history. But after that, you can never run for that same office again. You can run for another office, say 2 years after the ending of your term, but you cannot run for that office ever again. And so I think that would allow our politicians, the people, our elected officials, to concentrate on what they should be concentrating on, and that is doing their job. So that's the very fundamental idea that started this. I think we have to just eliminate re-election so that we don't have this situation where our politicians are placing their own political careers and partisan interests ahead of the interests of the country.
Now, when did the Solutions Party get started?
Well, I've been formulating these ideas for the last 3 or 4 years, and I've been kind of getting my ideas organized, because I think it's more than just ending re-election. I've made a bunch of proposals on my blog, and so I'm just actually starting it now. I'm hoping to get others interested. I'm hoping to get some people who might even present themselves as candidates. I think the country is ready for a real change. I think people are so sick and tired of the tribalism, of the rancor, of the bitterness, and it's very threatening. It's, you don't want people just automatically voting for one party or the other, regardless of the ideas being presented. We want our elections based on ideas, not on tribalism. So that's sort of a long-winded answer to your question.
As a political party, I know you do call yourself the non-political party.
Right.
But in order to make these changes of which you speak,
right,
would require the cooperation of Congress to begin with. Now, would the Solutions Party present candidates and then just have them voluntarily drop out after one term to set an example? Or how else would you implement this plan?
Well, that's exactly right. We've got to have people who are going to go to, if they get elected, will go precisely to make these changes. Since it has not been codified in law that you can only serve one term, yes, people would have to agree, and they would have to campaign and make promises that they're only going to serve one term. They're going to be concentrating on just getting these priorities implemented, and then yes, they would then not seek re-election. And so, I know if I were personally running for office, I haven't decided if I wanted to, but yes, I would do it exactly with that. I'm not going to say that I'm against re-election, except when it comes to myself, and then I want re-election. And so, yes, it would require people who buy into this idea of having our elected officials serve just one term and then moving on, and concentrating during that one term on getting things done, not on their next campaign.
Now, let's say, for example, that suddenly Congress agrees that that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So after 4 or 5 years, there will be no one left with more than a year of experience in office, any office. So whose responsibility will it be to remember and enforce protocol and the rules of the House and Senate?
I think that we have to ask, what are our politicians, our experienced politicians, what are they really experienced at? Well, they're experienced at being in constant campaign mode. They're experienced at, playing politics and advancing their partisan interests. Are they really experienced at getting things done? And I don't think that they are. I think what matters more than experience is having ideas and the willingness to talk with others and reach compromise for the good of the country. When a congressperson or whatever is presented with different ideas about different bills, about different aspects in our society, none of them are experts in every field. All of them require advisors. All of them require access to experts that give them, advice about how they should potentially approach an issue. And I think that experience in those sorts of matters could be made up by having access to neutral advisors and others who could help guide them through some of the things that require maybe some of the understanding of the more nuts and bolts aspects of governing.
I saw this advisory committee idea on your website, and but I can't help but wonder. You use the term "bring them together" as a sort of advisory board, but what I don't know is how would you bring them together? What would be the impetus there? Who would get chosen? How would you actually be creating another level of bureaucracy?
I don't believe so. I think that how a given politician would put together their own advisory committee. I think there could be lots of ways that could be implemented. There could be that could even be AI generated, for example, if a politician who needs an advisory committee for example, it has to do with regulating social media. How are they going to pick their experts? How are they going to pick that? That could be a list of potential candidates for their advisory committee, who, by the way, would come from a variety of backgrounds. You don't want just technical people. You want people who can approach the issue from a variety of points of view. That could be generated automatically, not necessarily specifically the people that they're going to choose, but a list of people that they could potentially choose. And so, and they could have, people with their staff. The chief of staff could help put together that advisory committee. But I don't think that would be an insurmountable problem. And I don't think that, the advisory committees are necessarily going to become another bureaucracy, because they would be, on an issue by issue basis.
Okay, I was under the impression that there would be one advisory committee to advise all incoming new office holders. But from what you're saying is each individual office holder would be responsible for creating their own advisory committee.
Yes, it would be from a recommended list. And the idea would be to try to get a variety of points of view, to try to make it a diverse advisory committee, because we don't want just a very biased advisory committee that has a certain agenda. We want diversity of thought. We want diversity of ideas, because that's going to better serve the office holder.
So what prevents the advisory committees from becoming corrupted? If our politicians are subject to corruption and we're trying to eliminate that by replacing them with an advisory committee, who has access to the advisory committee, and who can then sway their opinions?
Well, I think that these advisory committees are just temporary. So I think that it'd be harder. That's one of the things that would make them harder to corrupt, because they're not people who are going to be in positions of power and influence for extended periods of time. When we think of corruption, we think of a special interest group maybe trying to influence one or the other. But I don't think that is such a high possibility if these advisory committees are, number one, just temporary, and number two, it's not necessarily information that's going to be made public. Who's serving on the advisory committee, and besides that, because it's from a variety of individuals, even if a special interest is able to influence one, that's not necessarily going to influence the entire committee. I think having the diversity in the committee is key, and I think that would be much harder to corrupt than a long-term committee where the members are known and would be potentially susceptible to being influenced.
Am I correct in assuming that each individual lawmaker would have a budget with which to hire these people?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, right now they have budgets for their entire staff, and so this would just be an extension of that.
Okay. Now, speaking of budgets, how might a one-term limit affect fundraising, and not just on the micro level, but also on the macro level?
In other words, fundraising for a campaign?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think
For
that,
example, just how how much how much money would someone agree to invest to get a one-term job?
well, when we're talking about a one-term job, we're talking about a job that through which one has the opportunity to do something very special, and that is make their mark on history. And so I don't believe that elected office would be what it should be for people who want to make a difference, who want to make a positive change in history. And so I don't think that the idea that it's just going to be one term. If you have a sincere desire to serve the public, serve the people, I don't think that the one term is the issue here. It's really what is your motivation, and if your motivation is to help the country move forward and help build a better future for everybody, then I don't think people are going to think, well, gosh, why do I want to do all this work just for one term? It's more like, yes, I want to do this work, get elected, make my mark, and then move on.
Okay, that's the perspective from the candidate's point of view, but what about the donors? What about the political action committees, the super PACs? What effect would a one-term Congress have on those types of fundraising activities?
Well, that's exactly what we want to get rid of, is having political action committees and special interests funding our campaigns with the idea that this is this quid pro quo. It's exactly what we want to get rid of. And so if somebody wants to contribute to a political campaign, suppose some special interest groups, they're welcome to do it, but the candidate is not going to have any obligation to necessarily uh, look out for their or advocate for their interests. People get into office, and right now the way we have it is that they get into office, and the special interests through direct donations and through their ways to influence their constituents can hold our politicians hostage. And that's why, once they get in office, they align themselves so closely with the special interest group because they are worried about not getting reelected, about being primaried out of office. And so I, this I don't think this is necessarily going to eliminate special interests and political action committees donations to a candidate. But the big difference is that the candidate's not going to. I don't know if held hostage is the right word, but I'll use it in this case. It being held hostage to these special interests so that they can continue to be reelected.
Well, very few people on an individual basis have the wherewithal to finance a campaign. Pretty much every politician relies on donations from constituents and other interested parties. So if we did away with a lot of that, where would the money come from? And would it only be rich people who could run for office?
I don't believe so. I think that we could have special funds available for people who want to run for office and meet certain qualifications. But I don't believe that we have to have a system where only rich people could run. Yeah, sometimes you have to bootstrap your way up, and you do so by talking to people and getting people interested. I don't believe that having to be rich would be a qualification or be the only way that one could get into office. I think when somebody when somebody's determined to make their mark and want to get elected, I think that they can find ways to raise that money.
I do like the idea, mostly because I think it would bring each individual office holder back to their roots and become more of a representative of their constituents rather than a representative of the special interest groups of which you speak or the political party to which they belong. So if that were to happen, if we were to be able to go to this one term type of policy, Do you think it would last, or would people say, I wanted to get more done, but I just couldn't?
Are you talking about the elected officials?
Yes, sir.
That's one thing. You have one chance to make your difference, and you do your best. And if you're able to accomplish a lot, that's great. But if you can't, then um, you can say what you had hoped to accomplish. This is what your goals were. You weren't able to do it, but then the next candidate for that very office could say, "I promise to continue and build on the work of my predecessor." I don't. I think that this idea that we've got to have the same person in office, election after election is bogus. I think that if you like the policies, if you like the ideas of a certain candidate, they've only been in office once, well, then vote for somebody who promises to continue that work and to build on the ideas that the candidate who's leaving office had developed.
I know the wheels of government already turn very slowly. Do you think this would slow down an already slow process?
No, I think it would be exactly the opposite. I think what is really why don't things get done? I mean, look at our Congress right now. If you get the politics out of it and you concentrate on the ideas and on moving forward, I think things will move much quicker than they do now. I think things move at a look at all the budget issues we keep having because of all the political nonsense that is going on. I think so. I believe it'd be exactly the opposite. I think right now the obsession with getting reelected and the obsession with partisan interests is what's slowing things down now and impeding progress.
So the president too would be limited to one term.
Yes, and I think that one of the things that should be considered is maybe making the term 5 years instead of 4 for Congress, maybe 3 years instead of 2. I think 6 years is enough for Senate, but I think 2 years right now. What we have with the House members are in constant campaign mode with this 2 year term, and we don't want politicians in constant campaign mode. We want our politicians concentrating on moving the country forward. Now, yeah, one of the reasons why I've started this is also I've lived in different countries around the world, including China, a communist country, and in other places. And our way of government should be far better. I mean, in our way should be far more efficient. In those countries, you only. In fact, a Chinese friend once told me one of the great things they love about living in America is the freedom of thought. In countries like China, North Korea, there is no freedom of thought. And that's a great weakness. Our greatest strength is our diversity of our ideas. They're great ideas across the political spectrum. And, we've got to stop demonizing people because they have different ways of approaching things. And I think once we get the tribalism out of the picture, once we get the rancor and the out of control emotions out of the picture, and we focus on the ideas, we're going to blow them out of the water. We're going to show that we're going to have a democracy that enables freedom and enables prosperity. And that freedom and prosperity gap will eventually, just like it did with the Soviet Union, win the day. And so I think that this is one of the reasons why we've got to get this unproductive bickering and all these negative emotions out of our politics. And emotion manipulation. In fact, our elections have become more about manipulating emotions than they have become about ideas, which is not the way it should be.
I agree with you there. If we were going to change the length of terms and still limit it to just one, then that would require changes to the Constitution. How do you see that happening?
Well, the good thing about our country is that change to the Constitution can occur if we all agree, or a certain percentage of us, significant percentage of us, agree on how we want to change things. And I think that right now it's absolutely unfathomable to change the Constitution, given the tribalism, given the rancor, given the division. And by the way, the enemies of democracy are around the world are celebrating our dysfunction. They're celebrating this out of control tribalism and the bitterness. Some people have said that we might even end up in a civil war, and this is to the delight of the autocrats around the world. And we've got to really put an end to that. The future of democracy really depends on it. I've spent a lot of time in South America, and in South America, you have refugees from Venezuela and from Nicaragua and from other countries. And these autocrats are out to destroy democracy, because democracy is a great threat to their little tin pot empires. And so this is a critical time to make change in our country. And I think that once you get the tribalism and the emotions out of the picture and people focusing on ideas, changes to the Constitution can occur.
How soon do you think you might see a Solutions Party candidate on a ballot?
Well, I'm hoping as soon as possible. I'm just getting started here. But I really believe that the country is ripe for these ideas. I think that we're all, increasingly sick and tired of how things are functioning or dysfunctioning now. I think we're all tired of the politics. I think we're tired of politicians who will just say anything to get elected and stay in office. And I think that once these ideas are more known, and by the way, these are just proposals. I think the important thing is taking the best ideas from different people and combining them to make something even better. And so I think that I'm optimistic that the country is ripe for this kind of change.
Well, for those who may be interested, where would they go? What would they do? How would they find out more or even get involved?
First step would be just the website, www.solutionsparty.org. There I've got contact, and the first thing to do is just contact me, and let's start joining together and organizing and making things happen. And I think that the change, once you get some momentum built up, I really believe that things will come together quickly.
What kind of people are you looking for? What do you want them to bring to the table?
The most important thing to me is, number one, just buying into these ideas of, let's accept what the problems with our politicians and our politics is now, and let's look at ways that we can solve it. And let's, for example, as I've said, the addiction to power, the obsession with partisan interests that are so crippling our country. So people who basically buy into these ideas, but who also come from a different set of points of view. I have friends across the political spectrum. I have people who are Freedom Party, or I have people who are, MAGA supporters on the one hand. I have people who are practically socialists on the other. And, one of the things I like to say is, or tell people, is that I went to a small liberal arts college, and it was liberal in every sense of the word. Now, I was a Republican, capitalist. And so I got into a lot of emotionally charged discussions with my classmates. And, but I can say this, that after all the heated arguing, after all the points and counterpoints have been made, after all the intense debating, we could still go and have lunch together or dinner together or go study together, have coffee together, because even though we all had different ideas, we all respected each other, and we all knew that we had our hearts in the right place. And so that's what I think is important, is that, we want a diversity of points of view. We have the great ideas across the political spectrum. So we need people who, are open-minded, who have convictions, but are open-minded, are willing to debate their points of view with passion, but are also sincerely interested in hearing the other person's point of view, and coming up with let's pick the best ideas from all sides and move forward.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you about, or anything that you would just want people to know about the Solutions Party?
Yeah, I would say this, that the problems confronting our country are complex, and it has to be approached in a holistic sort of way. We've talked about re-election in this case, but I believe also that we have to take measures to make our journalism and news organizations more robust and more trustworthy. We have to take measures to address some of the terrible social problems like epidemic drug use. We should reform our economy so that it's not based on a non-renewable resource. We should be looking for making our economy based on an infinite source of energy. So I would really be happy if people would look at the website and look at the different ideas, because it's more than just reforming our politics through eliminating re-election. There has to be a whole series of things that we need to do to really get our country back on the right track.
All right, Evan. Well, I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. It's been an honor to be on your show.
The Listening Tube is written and produced by yours truly. Copyright 2024. Thank you for putting your ear to The Listening Tube. Subscribe today. I'm your host, Bob Woodley, for Thou Ad Infinitum.